Hello everyone, welcome to Kalam's answer writing session for the day. So today's question is about labor laws, and before we directly jump into the question, I have a little announcement to make. So if you have been following this program for the past one and a half week since its inception, you must have noticed the following. The questions that we are framing are mostly in relation to the current affairs issues that we see in the Hindu paper. Okay. So if you all want us to discuss more questions on either GS1 or GS4 or static part of GS2 and GS3, we can also do that. Okay. So if you all let us know your views about this issue, we will accordingly tweak the nature of the questions and make it a balance between both static questions and current questions and across all the GS papers of the examination. Okay, so that can be done. That is the announcement for the day. So having said that, I'll directly jump into the question for the day. The question is about labor laws, by the way. So before we jump into the question, like always, we will list down certain prerequisites that are required for us to keep in mind when we write an answer which comes under Indian economy. So once we look at the question, we try to place the question under different subtopics. Is it coming under disaster management? Is it coming under cyber security, or is it coming under a scheme? So once we place the question in one of these contexts, in one of these topics, we will see what the prerequisites are under this particular topic. Like for disaster management, we were talking about making a diagram. We were talking about using certain keywords like Hyogo framework, or its continuation, the Sendai framework, or the domestic measures of National Disaster Management Authority and Act, so on. So similarly, when the subtopic is Indian economy, I've looked at labor laws. I've realized that the question is about labor laws, so immediately I am placing it under Indian economy industries. So under Indian economy, when we handle any question under Indian economy, so there are certain prerequisites, all right. So we are talking about those prerequisites. So the first thing to keep in mind is the usage of acts and policies. So there are several acts and policies in relation to economy. There are several labor legislations, there are several FDI liberalization norms, and you have acts which are relevant for different mining and regulation, forest acts, and so on. All these are in relation to economy and environment. Sorry, we have to talk about just economy, by the way. So all these policies have to be kept in mind. You have to keep these policies in mind. And secondly, if you are relating these policies in your answer to poverty or something like that, you could talk about the relevant SDG or the sustainable development goals. Like I said, there are 17 sustainable development goals, and you have to keep a list of these in front of you. You have to memorize them and use them accordingly, as liberally as you do in terms of GS2 articles. As liberally as you use articles in GS2 paper, you are going to use the sustainable development goals in GS3. Keep that in mind. So that is another prerequisite that I want you to keep in mind. The third prerequisite is the usage of certain keywords. There are certain economic specific keywords which we were also talking about on the other day: demographic dividend, Laffer's curve, Phillips curve, Lorenz curve, and something like that, things like this. Once you use these things briefly in passing references in order to substantiate your points, it is going to increase the richness of your answer. Okay, so these are the prerequisites that one has to keep in mind when he addresses an Indian economy based question. Okay. So we will directly jump into the question. I'll first read the question out for you all, and then explain the question out for you all. And as usual, we will develop a basic skeleton for the answer that we are going to write. By basic skeleton, what do I mean? I basically mean the subparts that I am going to make in my answer, and how I will address them, and how I will give them importance proportionately. Okay. So let's read the question. Fault lines in framing and enforcing the labor laws are the prime cause of precarity of everyday life of workers in India. Elucidate, and also mention the steps to be taken for the welfare of the workers. Okay. So what are labor laws, by the way? Labor laws are basically legislations or provisions that we have which take care of employment conditions, which take care of social security provisions, and the formation of labor trade unions and so on. All these things which are conditions of in which labor work are called as labor laws. Okay, so in these labor laws, the way in which we are framing these labor laws is itself causing the problem. The way in which we are implementing these labor laws is also causing the problem. What kinds of problems? It is causing a problem of precarity of the everyday life of workers. Precarity is a situation of difficulty. It's just an English jargon, by the way. So everyday difficulties of workers which we see, whatever they are, whichever they are, which we will see in subsequent minutes. So these problems of the workers are mostly caused by the laws that we have framed, by the laws, the way in which the laws we are, by the way in which we are implementing these laws. Okay, so that is what he is trying to say. So he is trying to ask us to elucidate this particular theme, and then he is also asking us to give us certain measures. Give certain measures for this particular problem. So immediately, since we have understood the question, we will develop a basic framework which is going to be the skeleton of my answer. So the most important thing is to talk about the shortcomings of my laws. What laws? Labor laws and implementation. Because this is the basic theme of the question, and then he is asking me to elucidate on the same, and he is asking me to give out steps for the same. So we've basically converted this question into this framework. We've developed the subparts. We are basically telling them about the shortcomings of the labor laws and implementation as a cause of the difficulties of the laborers that are there presently, about the workers, and then we are going to give steps. We will move forward and talk about a conclusion which is not generic, 1 to 2 lines, and then we'll start by an introduction. Okay, and now since we've built our basic framework, we will look at ways in which we can enrich our answer, right? So in this particular context, we are talking about shortcomings of labor laws, and then we're talking about the steps. How about establishing the precarity? So in order to make the answer well rounded, we are basically starting by listing a basic problem, basic outwork of the problems which are faced by the workers in the country, and then we'll move forward to show that the causes of these problems are the shortcomings in our laws, are the shortcomings in the implementation of these laws. We are going to establish that, and then we'll move forward. We are going to tell them the steps that are required for us to improve this situation. So basically, we have created a nice framework of subparts for our answer, and yesterday we were talking about the concept of proportionate importance, by the way. So we are going to first list down what is very important. What is the crux of the question? The crux of the question is this and this, because these have been directly asked in my question. But this, whatever problems I am writing, is what I am doing to enrich my answer. So I am going to talk about this only briefly, so that by keeping these things in mind, my overall answer comes out to be a well-rounded, balanced answer. So we've talked about the structure. So what is going to be our introduction? The introduction is going to be either a definitional form or a current affairs form. So if you're talking about a definitional form, you could always talk about the meaning of labor reforms. I just defined the way in which labor reforms can be explained to you all. Okay, I told you all what the labor reforms could be, the employment terms, the trade union formations, and so on. You could tell the same to the examiner so that he understands what you mean by labor laws. Okay, so once you do that, he has a basic understanding about the factual depth and the conceptual depth you have. That is the definitional approach. The current affairs approach is to talk about some incident in recent times where the laborers have faced a problem, and you could talk about the labor laws as a cause of this problem. Okay, so you could also introduce your answer in that particular way. So these are the two ways in which you can introduce our answer, and then we will move to the body, in which we have made 3 subparts, and then we will move to the conclusion, which is going to be 1 or 2 line conclusion, which is neither too generic nor too complicated. Okay, so my basic structure of the answer is totally sorted. I have that in my mind. All I have to do is to is to use the content which I have read over the period of time, whether it is through newspapers or through coaching materials or to the classes that I've been through. I have to filter the content through this particular structure that we have developed in order to come up with a good, nicely patterned answer. That is the aim. Okay. So let's see if the person has done that. There is a sample answer which has been written in real time, in fact 1 or 2 minutes extra of the real time. In fact you just have 7.2 minutes. So this person seems to have written this answer in about 8 to 9 minutes in order to come up with a better answer, so that I can show you all the mistakes that people can make. Okay. So we'll read the answer and evaluate it. Okay. So he's saying that the labor laws deal with a variety of components such as employment terms, remuneration, safety norms, trade unions, etc. So this is a really decent introduction. Okay, this is not very heavy in terms of the facts it has. It is not very heavy in terms of the usage of quotes, but then it's a really good introduction because it is rooting the answer in the question. The whole question is revolving around labor laws. So he's talking about labor laws and what he means or interprets labor laws to be. Okay, so I as an examiner understand that he knows what he is talking about, so I will immediately move forward. Now what he does, he is trying to establish the precarity in everyday life of workers. See, he could have also written the word difficulties, okay, but he didn't do it because he is trying to mimic the nature of the question. So from the first line to the last line, if he uses subparts or subheadings like this, I know that he is lying within the bandwidth of the question, because I keep seeing the question ka statements itself in the subheadings of his answer. So I know that I'm pretty close. So I know that the student is pretty close to the topic that has been asked by the question. So let us look at the question, the points he has given. So he says that the conditions are difficult because of certain conditions are difficult, and he is trying to prove that the conditions are difficult. He says that the conditions, poor working conditions are there, and then as a result there are several mishaps such as Anaj Mandi incident. This happened recently. Sivakasi fire blast. So this is basically a fireworks industries, and fire blasts occur very frequently because of the informal nature of work that goes on there. So this is one way. He is basically establishing that the safety is poor, and then he is talking about contractualization and casualizations. These are basically keywords. Usage of these keywords basically densifies your answer. So this is leading to unregulated conditions, and these unregulated conditions lead to what? Poor working conditions, poor safety norms, and then he is talking about poor wages and social security provision. Social security provisions matlab insurance and so on, accidental insurance, life insurance and so on for workers. And then he is talking about women. See, this is a good point because he is just engendering his answer. He is basically sensitizing his answer to the gender norms. Okay, so he is talking about the problems keeping the lens broad. He is also talking about women separately. Okay, he is talking about the problem of women such as unequal wages, lack of washrooms, sexual harassment, etc. So overall he has listed down the problems of day to day which are faced by workers who go to the place of employment. Okay, so he has sensitized me to the problems that people have. Now I want to know what the reasons are for these problems which we are seeing. Okay, so he is giving you the reasons. Fault lines in framing and implementation. This is just another statement which is mimicking the question. So why do we have these problems? Because too many labor laws lead to a situation of license permit rush. So when you have too many labor laws, it is very difficult for you to monitor the situation or implement these laws in unison or in isolation. So it is going to create a problem of unregulated sector. So that is a problem. And then he says that acts like Manrega have further legitimized contractual labor with poor working conditions. So Manrega basically gives you seasonal employment. So what he is trying to say intelligently is that Manrega itself is, in a manner of speaking, legitimizing this contractual labor. So instead of doing this, Manrega could also talk about vertical mobility through skill development. That is not being done. So the person who works under Manrega is mostly a contract labor who works for 100 days and so on, if 150 days if it is a drought prone district and so on. So he is basically telling you that we are legitimizing the unregulated conditions. And then he is saying difficult provisions for retrenchment. and high costs made firms move to casual labor. Once they move to casual labors, all their sorted problems like poor working conditions, unregulated safety norms and so on, all these things come up. And then he says that the social security provisions in most labor laws have high economic costs to firms. So what he is trying to say here is that we have social security norms, we have norms to protect people, if they protect workers when they undergo when they come under an accident or there is some kind of mishap. But the problem is these social security provisions have certain kind of premiums that have to be paid by the employer in some measure, by the government, by the worker himself. So all these kinds of premiums are creating high economic costs of compliance. Okay, when the economic cost of compliance is high, it is going to be difficult for the firm to survive. So what the firm does, it eventually moves into casual labor. When it moves into casual labor, it doesn't have to really adhere to the norms. That is what he is trying to say. So that is a good point. Now he is being more sensitive. He is showing his emotional side by talking about domestic labor, the house help we have, the housemaids who come to our houses and work for us. These people, their conditions are not being regulated. It's not just about the industries and the workers in the industries that we have to talk about. These people, the domestic labor, also come under the labor laws, and we have to talk about them as well. So domestic labor in homes have been kept out of the basic labor laws that we have, leading to poor conditions for them. Good. Child Labor Act, Plantation Labor Act, etc. have inadequate provisions for worker welfare. See, he is trying to basically list down the acts. If possible, also give the years. Okay, the years in which these acts have come up. So this is a well-rounded answer. So he has what did he do so far? He started talking about the problems which these people face, and he did that only briefly. See, he has given only 4 points, but then he engendered those points, but he democratized those points by talking about women also. Okay, he's showing he's trying to hit the emotional side of the examiner by telling him that I am sensitive to the needs of the women. And then he moved forward. The writer of this answer, he is talking about the causes of this problem, which is the fault lines in framing the policies that are there. By framing poor policies, we are causing the problems, is what he is trying to say. And this is the crux of the question, like we have seen. So we are supposed to give proportionate importance to this particular subtopic, and he did that. He is talking about it in terms of 6 points. In fact, I see so many sub points in it: social security provisions which have economic costs of compliance and so on. So this is basically a rich answer. It is a very satisfactory answer because he has balanced these answers so far so well. Let's see what he does now. We basically know what he has to do now. He simply has to give us certain measures. He has satisfied the examiner so far. If he gives very nice points which are not generic under the next subheading, I'm going to be totally happy. So let's see what he does next. He says that the consolidation of labor laws into codes of social security, code of wages, etc. So whatever labor laws you have, which are so many in number, we have a plethora of labor laws, like I just mentioned, about 200 odd labor laws until recent times. So these have to be consolidated into different codes, into 4 different codes in relation to the current affairs we've been reading about, like a code on wages, a code on social security. So all these different laws have to be consolidated into these chunks, these 4 chunks, and doing that will help us implement the provisions better. Okay, taking into the account of opinions of labor unions. So basically he is trying to say that it has to be a two-way communication. Bottom up approach has to be used instead of using a top down approach of just legislating and trying to implement it. Take into account also the needs of trade unions, also the needs of labor unions, in order to democratize the provisions of the acts. Okay, that is what he is saying. And then he is moving to talking about occupational safety, implementation of code of occupational safety, mandating regular health checkups and so on. So far I've seen good points. I would like to see a point or two in relation to women. Okay, let's see if it does that. See, equal pay for equal wages for both men and women, adherence to Vishaka guidelines. Okay, so this point is specifically important in the context of the ILO's report, which talks about female labor force participation ratio, that is as low as 25% for India. So in this context, if you're talking about labor laws, you always have to talk about women, the problems they face, the solutions, the solutions you have for their problems. Equal pay for equal wages, one thing, and the second thing is to adhere to Vishaka guidelines. These guidelines are basically given by Supreme Court to prevent sexual harassment at workplace. Okay, good. And then he says that statutory minimum wages as per state, he could have said as per geography. So different geographies or different regions have different statutory wages depending upon the living conditions. Okay, so far the answer is good. I just want to see a generic a decent conclusion, and this is going to be the best answer. Okay, in a country with greater than 85% of labor force in informal sector, this is grammatically wrong, in informal sector, above steps can ensure labor welfare and dignity to the working man, women. Okay, this is properly engendered. Okay, so this is a decent conclusion. In fact, this is a beautiful conclusion because it also has a fact in it. So overall, I think he did really well. So this is what we are supposed to do. We have to first look at the question, and then we cherry pick the subparts that we are going to write. We have to convert the question into a basic skeleton. We see the subparts, and then we give important and then we prioritize these subparts. Those subparts which are not so important will be talked in terms of passing reference. Those subparts which are really important, like you have here the steps for welfare and the fault lines in framing and implementation, these subparts are really important, so we have to talk about them in elaborate terms. That is what he did. So the question discussion for the day is over. So what do? We go back home, we write the answer, and then we get it evaluated. Thank you.